Mr. Secretary, you have described in the past the importance of the housing market to the economic recovery. You opposed the foreclosure moratorium basically on those grounds. And so I'd like to ask a few questions about the housing market and specifically the mortgage situation, the foreclosure situation that is out there. And it strikes me that a lot of different arrows are pointing to a catastrophic bureaucratic failure on the part of the banks and the servicers in dealings with distressed homeowners. The HAMP program is operating at 1/5 of its self-defined level of success, which was about less than half of the actual foreclosure liability that we face as a country. So that can't be seen as anything resembling a success. When I talk to my realtors in Rhode Island, to a person, literally at meetings with a dozen or more realtors, they have had short sales on the books with a bank, and that same bank has foreclosed on the property during the short sale, with the result that a property that was going to be sold for 90% of value is now trashed and is in the foreclosure pool at 40 to 50% of value. When you deal with, as we all do, with our constituents who are trying to work their way through mortgage modifications, it's a nightmare. I've had people who've been dealing for 19 months. They never found a person who would give them their last name. They never had anybody involved who could make a decision. And recently in Rhode Island, to sort of put a fourth arrow on this, the local bankruptcy court has made findings that in virtually every case, there is literally no response on the part of the banks when these problems come in, and so they've had to develop a special program to try to do something incredibly simple. Get a human from the bank who will make a decision in the room with the homeowner before you throw him out of his house. That is so offensive to Deutsche Bank that they've actually challenged the regulation in court, and we're trying to resolve that legislatively. But when all those arrows point in the same direction, the HAMP failure, the foreclosure nightmare that people experience, the court decisions, the realtor's short sale experience, they all point to a huge bank bureaucracy that is incompetent, that is tormenting people, that is doing great damage to the investors. I mean, who got hurt when the short sale got wiped out because the bank foreclosed on its own short sale? The investors did. We've been corresponding about this, and you've been sending me all these cheerful letters about how, don't
cheerful.
worry, good news is around the corner.
Not cheerful, never cheerful.
And I don't see good news around the corner. We've been doing this for more than a year. Have you analyzed the extent to which the HAMP incentives are overwhelmed by the existing financial incentives that the servicers have for dealing with foreclosure, dealing with programs? My take is that they're insignificant, and therefore that's one of the reasons the HAMP program has failed. And the second thing is you've kept issuing these sort of memoranda and suggestions as to the time frame within which banks should be acting. They're not. They just aren't. I don't care what time frame you've said, they aren't doing it. Where are you in terms of enforcement? Have you punished anybody for not doing it? And if you look specifically at whether they are phoning up the file by continuing to demand, one of the things we hear all the time is that people have the same records asked of them 6, 7, 8 times. It strikes me that there's at least a reasonable case to be made that because your suggestions for the timing on this start with the close of the file, they've figured out that if you keep asking people for the same information over and over again and chucking it in the file, whatever they're doing, they can wait and never have the file closed and never start your clock. So either your suggestions to them for timing are just failing, or they're not being enforced, or they're being gamed. Please tell me where that is, because I do think that's important to the underlying economic recovery.
Senator, you are absolutely right that this is a tragic, terrible mess across the country still, and we are not coming to the end of that amount of pain and risk and trauma to homeowners caught up in this crisis, and many of them are completely innocent victims of the failures of the system before this. Now, you're also right that servicers and banks on a whole, I would say, are still doing a terribly inadequate job of meeting the needs of their customers, help customers navigate through this basic process. And we are are going to have to do a better job of trying to reach as many people as we can reasonably reach with these programs. Now, one thing about what we have accomplished, because it's important to recognize this, it is about 4 million people have benefited from mortgage modifications since the beginning, since these programs were launched. Now, a relatively small number of those are permanent modifications in HAMP, but don't understate, please, the impact that has had on millions of homeowners in reducing their monthly payments. The people that are not, there are people we aren't going to reach with these programs because a lot of the people facing foreclosure are individuals for whom it's their second home. It's an investor.
I get it. Let me interrupt because I understand your point. All foreclosures can't be prevented. That's not the point. And that wasn't the point when I urged you to do a foreclosure moratorium. The point of the foreclosure moratorium wasn't to stop all foreclosures. The point of the foreclosure moratorium was to smack the banking industry and the servicers up the side of the head and let them know there aren't going to be foreclosures until they sort out this mess that has been for 2 years a bureaucratic nightmare that is ensnaring millions of Americans. And it's that bureaucratic nightmare that is the focus of my question, not the fact that for some people foreclosures are inevitable.
I was going to agree with you, not disagree with you, in your characterization of the problem still. You asked why isn't it stronger, why isn't it better? And you're right that this is always a mix of compulsion and incentive. And the incentives, no.
Who've you whacked for failing?
The incentives we under the law, we do not have the power under the law to compel. We have the capacity financially to provide in incentives. Now, I think those incentives have not been powerful enough in all cases to overwhelm the rest of the muck these services have created. I agree with you about that. But we do not have the power to compel. Congress did not give us that power, and that limits our leverage over the outcome. However, we are doing as much as we can, given the tools Congress has given us, to try to reach more people. And we're going to be able to reach substantially more people, although we won't come close to those initial estimates we laid out at the beginning of the program.